I can't stay here. I have to go. They're waiting.
To save my brother, I agreed to marry the mob boss, with no idea of the price my heart would pay for it. When Ryder disappeared because of a debt he never should have taken on, I ran to the most dangerous man in Chicago to beg for his life. Kieran Moretti didn't ask me for money. He didn't ask me for favors. He offered me a marriage contract. 6 months beside a man everyone feared. 6 months to save my family. I agreed thinking I was signing a deal. I didn't know that deal would save the people I loved and put my own heart at risk. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Bag That Wasn't My Brother's. The last coin dropped into the palm of my hand, with the saddest sound in the world. It was a quarter, stained with coffee, its edge worn down by all the tired hands that had passed it along before mine, and it was going to make all the difference between the electric bill getting paid or not that week. I was behind the counter at the neighborhood coffee shop, at the end of the overnight shift, counting spare change like someone praying the rosary. The smell of reheated coffee mixed with the lemon detergent in the sink, and the ceiling light flickered every so often, as if it too were at the end of its shift. Outside, Chicago slept its gray November sleep, steam rising from the manholes and a wind slipping through the cracks in the door as if it also wanted to ask for coffee. "Girl, if you squeeze that coin any harder, it's gonna hand you back a therapist." Marlo Quinn tossed a rag onto the counter and leaned in beside me, her dark bangs escaping the clip. 26 years old, sharp tongue, and the rare gift of cracking a joke before tragedy had time to land. She was the one thing about my shift I wouldn't trade for money. "I can hear the coin crying," I answered, and laughed when it hurt, because that's how I worked. "I think it wants to go back in the register. Don't give it back. That right there is your scholarship to happiness." Marlo gathered the dirty mugs over to the sink, and the clink of the dishes filled the silence between us. By the way, the guy at table 3 left a $5 tip and called me sweetie. I can't decide whether to take the money or take the chance to bite him. Take the money. Biting's free. I laughed softly, dropped the coins into the old cookie tin that served as our safe, took off my apron, and hung it on the hook beside the schedule board, where my name showed up on 4 shifts that week, underlined twice. Marlo watched while I put on the thin coat that couldn't handle one more winter. She didn't say anything about the coat. Marlo never did. It was her way of caring. "You're going straight home, right?" she asked, pretending it was just an offhand line. "I am. Lily's probably on the couch again. Kiss the little one for me, and the annoying brother too. I'll kiss him and he'll hate me. That's exactly why." The bus dropped me off 2 blocks from the apartment. I'd left the coffee shop at 6 the morning before, made 3 deliveries in the late afternoon, come back for the overnight shift. My body didn't even know what day it was anymore. I climbed the 3 flights without an elevator, counting the steps, because counting was a way of not thinking. 1, 2, 3, rest. 4, 5, 6, rest. The door creaked like always, and the smell of the apartment was the same as always. Cheap detergent, cardboard from the cereal box, the last of the night's tea going cold in the mug in the sink. Lily was sleeping sideways on the couch, the earless bear clutched to her chest like someone holding a life preserver. 8 years old fit there with an ease that hurt. I covered the girl with the plaid blanket, smoothed the thin hair stuck to her sweaty forehead, and stood watching her chest rise and fall for 1 second longer than was reasonable. "Ryder," I called softly, heading down the hall. His bedroom door was ajar. The bed, made. His coat, gone. The note he usually left when he went out late. Nowhere. I rested my forehead against the wood and breathed slowly, taking in the smell of old wood and the cheap deodorant he used too much of. My phone rang in my bag before I could invent an excuse for the tightness in my chest. Unknown number. I answered right away. "Renlow?" A man's voice. Calm. In no hurry. "Who's speaking?" "Doesn't matter. Your brother's in a warehouse in the Eastport district. Pier 17. If you want to come get him, come now. Alone." "Wait." The call dropped. I stood there with the phone in my hand and felt the blood drain from my fingertips. I looked at Lily on the couch. I looked at the window, where the wind stirred the yellowed curtain. I looked at the clock, 3:40 in the morning. I called Mrs. Pereira from downstairs, lying that it was an emergency at the coffee shop. She crossed the hall in her robe with a crumpled face and said she'd stay with Lily until I got back. I kissed my sister's forehead, grabbed the thin coat again, and went down the 3 flights without counting this time. The night bus to the Eastport district was a corridor of yellow lights and the smell of fuel. I looked out the window and didn't see the city. I saw my mother's face in a picture frame. Saw my father gripping the wheel the night he didn't come back. Saw 8-year-old Ryder asking if orphan was a forever word. I swallowed the old anger along with my spit. It wasn't the time to mourn dead parents. It was the time to not lose what was left. I got off the bus a block from Pier 17. The lake wind came in cold, with a taste of iron and motor oil. The warehouses lined up one beside the other, dark, and the one I was looking for was the last, its metal door ajar, letting a thin thread of yellow light escape. I swallowed my fear, settled the coat against my body the way you'd settle a ridiculous suit of armor, and pushed the door open. The sound of my sneakers on the concrete echoed too loud. The high walls threw back every step amplified, and the smell inside was coal dust, damp cardboard, and something that might have been gunpowder or just my imagination learning to be dangerous. And then I saw him. He was sitting in an office chair in the middle of the warehouse, as if the warehouse itself were his office. Dark suit, dark tie, broad shoulders, one knee crossed over the other. His hands rested on the arms of the chair with the calm of a man who never needed to clench his fists. Behind him, 2 men stood, expressionless, their shoulders set like locked doors. To the right, hunched in a wooden chair, with a cut at the corner of his mouth and his coat torn, was Ryder. Alive, breathing, scared, but alive. I held the air between my ribs, carefully, as if it might escape through the gaps in my fingers. "You're the sister," the man in the chair said. It wasn't a question. His voice was low, polished, cold without being cruel, like stone. "Talia Renlow." "I am." Closer. I walked. 5 steps. 10. The cracked concrete scraped under my soles, and each step seemed louder than the last. I stopped 3 meters from him. Ryder blinked in my direction as if he wanted to say, "Don't stay. Go away." But I pretended I didn't see. "Who are you?" I asked, and my voice came out steadier than the rest of my body. Kieran Moretti. The name didn't need an introduction. Even someone who had never set foot in an underground Chicago casino knew what that surname meant. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from making the face my face wanted to make. "My brother is 17. I know. He didn't know what he was carrying. I know that too." "Then let him go." Kieran tilted his head 1/2 centimeter. His eyes were a dark gray, the kind that seemed to appraise the price of every piece of clothing I wore and the worth of every word I spoke. He didn't blink often. It was a silly detail, and even so, it was the detail that frightened me. "The bag your brother was carrying had money from an operation of mine," he said, and the sentence held no anger. It held accounting. Letting him go without consequence is a luxury I can't afford. My enemies pay attention. "Your enemies don't have his name," I said. "They have mine now." One of the men behind him made a small sound of surprise, a poorly disguised clearing of the throat. Kieran did not. "Go on. I work. I pull 2 shifts. I can pay back the bag in installments. I can pay with hours. I can pay with anything that isn't my dignity or my brother's life." The words came out run together, and I barely recognized my own voice. "I didn't come here to beg. I came to negotiate." "Negotiate." "Yes." He looked at me for a stretch of time that seemed too long for my knees. It wasn't the look of a man deciding to undress a woman with his eyes. It was the look of a man deciding whether a woman was useful. I don't even know which was worse. Maybe the second, because the first I'd already learned to throw back across the coffee shop counter, and the second forced me to invent a new way of not bowing my head. "You're trembling, Miss Renlow." "I'm cold." "It isn't cold." "Then it's cold anyway." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a smile. It was almost, and it was so small that I doubted I'd seen it. His fingers tapped once on the arm of the chair, a dry sound, almost like a clock, and stopped. Behind him, in the dark back of the warehouse, a side door opened for 2 seconds. An older man, gray hair, expensive coat, ran his eyes over the warehouse like someone checking whether dinner was ready. He greeted Kieran with a minimal nod. Kieran returned the nod without looking, as if his own back had eyes to recognize that particular man. The door closed again. With a muffled click I only heard because everything inside me was paying attention. In that moment, he was just one more shadow among the many shadows that warehouse swallowed. "Can I see my brother up close?" I asked. "You can." I walked to Ryder slowly. I knelt in front of him. I touched my brother's chin with the care of someone touching a cracked window. His lip was cut, and his eyes were red. The eyes of someone who'd cried and stopped crying 3 times in a row. His breath smelled of fear, That sour smell only a teenage body knows how to give off when it understands, too late, that it played with the wrong thing. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. I kissed his forehead, smoothed his hair to the side the way my mother used to, and stood back up. "What do you want?" I asked, turning to Kieran. "I have a proposal." "I'm listening." He uncrossed his legs slowly, rested his elbows on his knees. For the first time, he leaned forward. The distance between us shortened with that gesture alone, and I swear the air in the warehouse grew denser, as if the cold off the lake had decided to pull back to hear what he was about to say. "And you're not going to like it." Chapter 2. The contract that wouldn't fit in my mouth. "Not liking things is a luxury I can't afford either," I answered, and planted my feet into the concrete to keep from moving. "Say it." Kieran watched me for one more second, as if confirming a sum. Then he raised a finger toward the two men behind him, and the two stepped back without making a sound. The warehouse got bigger from that alone. The smell of old oil and the lake's stagnant water came in through the open side door, and somewhere on the roof a loose sheet of metal rattled in the wind. "Marriage," he said. The word hung in the air of the warehouse, refusing to fall. "Excuse me? 6 months. You marry me. You live in my house. You show up at the events where I need a wife to show up. In exchange, your brother's debt disappears. He comes under the family's protection. No one touches him. Your sister gets a room, school, and whatever else she needs. You, at the end of the 6 months, walk away with a sum that secures the lives of all three of you without ever counting coins at a coffee shop again." He made a minimal pause, and the silence between his sentences had the weight of something thought through beforehand. "It isn't a romantic proposal. It's a contract." I laughed. It wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was the laugh of a person who needs her body to do something while her head processes the impossible. The sound came out dry, short, and died before it reached the walls. "You're offering me a ring in exchange for a boy with a cut lip. I'm offering protection in exchange for stability. Marriage is a technical word. Marriage is a whole word. To me, it's technical. Lucky you." He didn't answer. He waited. And I hated the way he waited, with his chin slightly tilted and his eyes fixed, as if he already knew the answer before I did. His fingers rested on the arm of the chair without tapping, without moving, without betraying anything. It was the kind of stillness that cost training. I looked at Ryder. He shook his head almost imperceptibly. "No, Talia, don't do this." I remembered the earless bear on the couch, Lily pretending she didn't want new shoes, the electric bill that lived on top of the fridge like a spiteful reminder. I remembered my parents driving off the day they didn't come back, the last time I saw the two of them laughing in that front seat. I remembered every morning I had sworn, inside my chest, that I wouldn't let anyone else go away because of money. "I accept," I said. The word came out before fear had learned to spell. "Good." Kieran rose from the chair. The movement was single, fluid, and he stood taller than I expected. "Let's go." Now? I need to get my sister. She's already being picked up. The address was given to me when you walked into this warehouse." He saw my face and added, in the same neutral voice, "With the neighbor. No break-in. My people know how to ask." I swallowed dryly and followed. The two men helped Ryder up, with professional care, as if they were used to holding up bodies that didn't want to be held up. I held my brother's arm, felt the small tremor beneath his sleeve, and he rested his forehead on my shoulder for 1 second, too brief for anyone to notice, except me. We left the warehouse through the side door, and the lake wind hit my face like a good morning slap, freezing, smelling of iron and dirty brine. The car was black, armored, the kind that swallowed the street's noise before it reached the windows. The seat leather was warm, freshly vacated. Kieran opened the back door for me without ceremony and without gallantry. He sat on the other side, keeping between us the exact distance of a man who knew how to measure distances. Ryder got into the front seat, beside the driver. No one said anything for the first 10 minutes. I looked out the window and watched Chicago flip from Port District to Wide Avenue, then to gated suburb, at a speed that seemed more rehearsed than timed. The headlights of the other cars passed across the glass and drew thin lines on his face, without him turning once to give me back the look. 25 minutes after the warehouse, the car stopped in front of an iron gate. The sky wasn't even thinking about lightning yet. It was a little past 5 in the morning, and even so the house seemed to have been awake for hours. The gate opened on its own, with the low creak of a well-maintained motor. We crossed a garden with a fountain in the center, the water falling in 3 tiers, lit from below, marble in the entryway. cold even to the eyes. An antique chandelier at the height of the second floor, its crystals chiming when the door closed behind us. I got out of the car and stood in the hall, the thin coat giving me away as an intruder. A woman in her early 50s, gray hair pinned low, an immaculate dark dress, appeared through the door on the right. Her steps made no sound on the marble. "Mrs. Halbrook," Kieran said behind me. "This is Talia. The young man is her brother. The little sister arrives soon. Prepare 3 rooms." "Yes, sir." Before she could leave, a man appeared from the stairs, shorter than Kieran, thinner, gray suit, the face of someone who had seen everything and lost patience with most of it. He looked at me. He looked at Kieran. He looked at me again, in no hurry, as if he were checking an inventory. "I'll let the kitchen know the menu's changed," he said, with a flatness so deadpan it took me 3 seconds to understand it was a joke. "Maybe sir will need to eat something that isn't a document." Kieran didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth moved 1/2 millimeter, and this time I swear I saw it. "Thomas, take Ryder to the east room. See to the lip." "Yes, boss," he answered. The word boss came out so flat it sounded like polite mockery. Ryder looked at me with the whole question in his eyes. I squeezed his hand once and let go. "Go, Ryder. I'm here." He climbed the stairs with Thomas, slowly, without letting go of the railing. Mrs. Halbrook went after them. I was left alone in the hall, with the man I'd just promised to marry, and the silence of the place seemed sculpted to make you hear your own breathing. "Study," Kieran said. "This way." I followed him down a hallway with a high ceiling. The walls were covered in dark frames, old photographs of men who all seemed to be relatives of the same closed-off face. I glanced sideways, and none of them was smiling. He opened a double door and gestured me in with his hand. The study had floor-to-ceiling shelves, books with worn leather spines, a solid wood desk with a green-shaded lamplit, a leather armchair where I imagined he read, and 2 chairs in front of the desk. It smelled of old paper, waxed wood, and a discreet trace of cold tobacco. He pointed to one. I sat. From the drawer, he took a leather folder. From the folder, 3 stapled pages. He pushed the pages across the top until they stopped in front of me. "Read," I read. The words were technical, cold, with numbered clauses. Civil marriage within 3 days. Mandatory cohabitation for 6 months. Full protection for Ryder Renlow and Lily Renlow. Complete settlement of the debt involving the transport of the bag. Payment at the end of the contract. Prohibition of sexual contact without explicit consent of both parties. That sentence made me stop and reread, and for an instant I looked at him over the paper, but he was watching the dark window, not me. Confidentiality clauses, property clauses, clauses about possible future scenarios that I skimmed too fast because my head was already aching and my body was running on coffee from 12 hours earlier. I reached the last page, a line for the signature. "Pen," I said, without lifting my eyes. He took one from the inner pocket of his jacket. He held it out over the desk. I reached out my hand. His fingers and mine met on the body of the pen, and the temperature of his skin surprised me, warmer than anything in that room. I pulled. He didn't let go right away. It was a second, maybe 2, the kind of second that snags on your skin and stays. I looked up. He was looking at me, not at the pen, not at the contract, at me, with an attention that seemed to be reading fine print somewhere inside my face. "You can let go," I said, in a voice lower than I meant. He let go, slowly, like someone choosing the moment, not like someone obeying. I signed. The handwriting came out firm. I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I didn't ask for time. I lifted my eyes again and handed the pen back with the same calm he had given it. "Sunday," Kieran said, putting the contract back in the folder. "The ceremony is here. No party, no guests. You can bring 1 person, if you want." Marlowe noted. "Can I see my sister now?" "Mrs. Halbrook will let you know when the car arrives." He walked me to the study door. In the hallway, he stopped 1/2 a step behind me, too close for a man who barely knew me, too far for anything else. I caught the scent of his jacket before I caught him properly. Something woodsy, clean, without sweetness. "Miss Renlow." "Mrs. Moretti. In 3 days," I answered without turning. "Talia," he corrected, without apologizing. You don't have to fake courage inside my house. No one here is going to hurt you. I'm not faking. I know. That's why I said it." I finally turned. His eyes were closer than I'd calculated. For a second, neither of us blinked, and the whole hallway seemed to shrink to the size of that distance. I held the look for as long as I could hold my breath, and then I looked away, because I couldn't sustain 2 things at once. Mrs. Halbrook took me to a guest room on the second floor. Heavy wine-colored curtains, a bed too wide for one person, a bathroom with towels folded in thirds like a hotel. There was a vase of fresh white flowers on the dresser, still damp, as if someone had cut the stems minutes earlier. Lily arrived half an hour later, sleepy, the earless bear under her arm, and confusion in her eyes. I took my sister into my lap, felt the small warm weight resting against my chest, sat on the edge of the bed, and rocked her while she fell back asleep, the smell of her cheap soap still on her skin. When the room fell silent, I looked at the high ceiling, at the chandelier that was probably worth more than everything I had ever owned in my life, and tried to tell myself I'd done the right thing. I tried to tell myself 6 months were nothing, that I'd already survived worse things, that a technical marriage was only a technical marriage, but the skin of my right hand still remembered the extra second on the pen, the brief warmth of his fingers brushing mine, and I knew, with a certainty that scared me more than the entire warehouse, that no technicality would hold for 6 months. On Sunday, I would say yes, and he had already begun to look at me as if he already knew. Chapter 3, Sunday at the Mansion. I woke up Sunday with the sense that the air inside that mansion weighed more than the air of any other place I'd ever slept. Light came through the raw linen curtain with an elegance that didn't match what was about to happen to me. I lay there for a while, looking at the high ceiling, counting the plaster moldings like someone praying a rosary without faith. The walls were an antique cream, with dark baseboards that seemed to absorb the sound of my thoughts. In 3 hours, I would be the contractual wife of Kieran Moretti. And even so, my mind insisted on listing what was missing from the fridge of the apartment I didn't even live in anymore. The smell of the room was new to my nose, discreet lavender mixed with the cedar of the closed wardrobe, and a faint trace of wax on the floorboards that creaked softly when someone walked down the hall. I rolled to one side and felt the cold sheet against the skin of my arm. Expensive cotton, the kind you recognize without ever having touched before. I thought of Lily's narrow bed in the apartment, of the thin mattress that sagged in the middle, and the thought pulled out the first tear of the day, which I swallowed before it could become a drop. Mrs. Halbrook knocked on the door with 2 sharp raps, the kind that don't ask permission, only announce. She came in already holding the dress hung on a dark wooden hanger. It wasn't white. It was sand-colored, simple, long, no veil, no shine, nothing that spoke of celebration. Kieran had chosen with calculated precision, a dress that didn't lie. I thanked her, because it was the only polite thing I knew how to do at that hour, and she answered with a nod that held more respect than pity, which was a surprise I'd save for later. "Mrs. Moretti," she said to me, on her way to the door, without looking back. "If you need anything, the bell is on the nightstand. Mrs. Moretti." It was the first time anyone had spoken that name on me. It hurt less than I expected, and that hurt even more. Marlowe arrived at 9. I heard her voice before I saw her, crossing the marble hall like a slap of reality. "Girl, I've already been through 3 gates and 2 armed men. If I'm gonna be your witness, these guys have to stop frisking me. I didn't bring a weapon. I brought anxiety." I laughed. It wasn't a day for laughing, but the laugh came out before I authorized it. The mansion's private chapel was at the end of a hallway I hadn't yet walked. Pale stone walls, an old stained glass window at the back with a rose flanked by 2 swords that I didn't yet know how to read. The morning light hit the colored glass and threw red stains on the floor, like small wounds in order. The smell there was old incense mixed with flowers cut that same morning. 3 dark wooden chairs, 3 witnesses. Thomas Devlin standing with his arms crossed in a corner, with the expression of someone attending the funeral of some distant cousin. Marlowe beside him, in heels, holding her bag against her chest like a shield. Mrs. Halbrook firm at the entrance, hands clasped in front of her gray dress. Ryder appeared in the hallway before the chapel. It was the first thing that truly threw me off balance. His lips still had the thin mark of the healing cut, but the bruises had faded in the 3 days he'd wandered from room to room around the mansion, not knowing where to rest his shoulders. He came up to me in a black suit that didn't quite fit him in the shoulders, adjusted his own sleeve, a new gesture, one he'd learned in front of the mirror in the East Room, and looked at me as if he wanted to apologize for his whole life all at once. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I already did," I answered, and straightened his collar. That gesture anchored me. His fingers were cold, and his pulse trembled slightly, and I pretended not to notice so I wouldn't fall apart before it was time. That was when Lily ran past in tights and pretended she hadn't dropped a petal on the floor. I looked at Ryder, he looked at me, and the two of us understood the same thing without needing to say it. I was there for both of them, and both of them were alive. The rest was paper. I entered the chapel alone. There was no music. There was no priest. There was a paid judge, glasses on the tip of his nose, the certificate open on a small table. And there was Kieran. He was in a dark suit, like always, but the tie was sand-colored, not black, a detail I noted without meaning to, because it was exactly the color of my dress. A calculated coincidence. His eyes met mine and stayed there, in no hurry, with no clear reading, like a man forcing himself to look at what he's about to sign. I saw his jaw clench once, almost invisible, and then relax. "Talia Renlow," the judge said. "Do you accept?" I searched for Ryder with my eyes, standing just outside the half-open door, for the first time in months, without visible injuries. Lily had stopped running and was clinging to Marlowe's leg. Last, I faced the man in front of me and looked in him for some trace of triumph. I didn't find it. I found silence, and the silence was almost worse. "I do," I answered. Kieran said his word with the same calm with which he'd sign a port contract. No ceremony, no promise. Not even the customary phrase about love, which the judge had the delicacy to skip. The rings were exchanged in silence. His simple, matte, no crest. Mine, thin, with a single dark stone. When he put it on my hand, his fingers brushed my wrist for half a second longer than necessary. His skin was warm, firm, and I felt his pulse beating against mine before he drew back. I felt it, and he knew that I had. There was no kiss. It was the one thing from the traditional script he cut, and I thanked him in silence. Marlowe signed the certificate as a witness, scribbling her surname with irony in the flesh. Thomas signed in a straight line. Mrs. Halbrook signed in small handwriting. It was done. I was Talia Moretti on a paper tucked inside a leather folder that the family's lawyer carried off before I'd even breathed twice. Marlowe pulled me out to the garden before lunch. The fountain murmured in the middle of the lawn, the water falling over 3 stone steps. The smell of freshly cut grass rose from the ground and mixed with the jasmine that wound along the wall. She lit a cigarette. I didn't know she smoked. "Girl," she said, exhaling the smoke to the opposite side, "I have a serious question. Go ahead. Does the mob pay hazard pay?" I laughed so hard I had to sit on the edge of the fountain. The stone was warm from the sun, rough under my fingers when I leaned on it. Marlowe sat beside me and pretended to look at the water. "I don't know if I'm okay," I said, after a while. "I know," she answered, "but you're breathing. For today, that's enough." She stretched out her fingers and took my hand, without squeezing, just presence. The new ring shone between us, strange like a foreign body the skin hadn't yet absorbed. It was the first whole breath I'd drawn since I walked into that warehouse, and it was in the garden, with the smell of cheap cigarette mixed with the scent of jasmine, beside the only person who still called me girl instead of ma'am. Lunch was served in the large dining room, at a table too long for 7 people. Light came in through 3 tall windows and hit the crystal of the glasses, and each piece of silverware had a weight in the hand that said more about money than about hunger. Kieran sat at the head, I at the end on his right, Ryder beside me, Lily across, in a chair with an extra cushion so she could reach her plate, Marlowe beside her, Tomas and Mrs. Halbrook farther back. The bread arrived in a silver basket. Lily looked at the biggest piece and tried to cut it with the butter knife. Her little hand slipped. Kieran, without looking at me, without asking permission, without making a spectacle, reached out his arm, took Lily's knife with the gentleness of someone disarming a child and not a creature, and cut the bread into 4 equal pieces. He handed the basket back to her. "Thank you," Lily said, her mouth full before the words. Kieran answered with a tiny nod and went back to looking at his plate. I sat there holding my fork in the air. It was a small gesture. It was meant to be small. But something inside me, some wall I'd thrown up in a hurry that week, gained a crack too thin to be patched over with sarcasm. I looked away before he could notice, and pretended interest in the soup going cold in front of me. The afternoon passed in a blur of moving in, boxes arriving upstairs, Mrs. Halbrook arranging Lily's room with a blue quilt with white polka dots that had been chosen without consulting me, and that even so was the right thing. Ryder arranged his own books on the shelf in his new room, in silence, as if each spine were an apology for being there. I ran my hand over the spine of one of them, a battered math textbook, and felt the same thing you feel watching your child sleep after a high fever. That night, after Lily fell asleep clutching the earless bear she refused to leave behind, I went down for a glass of water. I didn't turn on the upstairs hallway light. I I didn't need to. There was a low chandelier dripping golden light onto the walls, turning the dark rug into a quiet river. The hallway smelled of waxed wood and some white flower in a vase in the half-light. It was in that hallway that I crossed paths with Kieran. He was coming from the opposite direction, still in his suit, still with the gray tie, holding a folder under his arm. He stopped a meter from me. He didn't look away. The golden light caught the side of his face and revealed a shadow of stubble that hadn't been there in the morning. "Do you need something?" he asked, voice low. "Water. There's some in the kitchen." "I know." He didn't get out of the way. Neither did I. The silence between us grew heavy like the air before rain, and I remembered, without meaning to, the extra second with the pen in the study, his skin brushing my wrist again. Hours earlier, the gray color he'd chosen to match me without saying so. "You can ask for anything," he said. "For Lily, for your brother, for yourself." "I already asked," I answered. "I'm asking now, and you've already given it to me." He held the look. I held mine. His eyes were dark, calm on the outside, but I'd already learned to look for the crack. It was there, small, in the way he gripped the handle of the folder 1 second too long. His fingers were long, the knuckles marked, and I hated that I'd noticed. "Good night, Talia." "Good night, Kieran." I went to the kitchen without looking back. I drank the water standing up, leaning against the marble counter, and pretended the glass trembled because of the cold. The stone was freezing against my waist, and it was the only honest thing in the whole room. I climbed the stairs slowly, counting the steps, so I wouldn't think about anything but numbers. I went into the room, closed the door behind me with more care than necessary, and turned the key in the lock. The sound of the latch was louder than I expected. I rested my forehead against the wood. I breathed. It wasn't him I was locking the door against. It was myself. And that was the first uncomfortable truth I gathered in that mansion. Chapter 4. The Night at the Casino. 2 weeks passed with the strange precision of someone living inside her own dream. Without knowing whether she'll wake up well, I learned the way to the kitchen, which had a marble floor too cold for bare feet and smelled of freshly ground coffee from before the sun came up. I learned the hour when Mrs. Holbrook changed the flowers in the hall, always white lilies, always before 9, always with the same look of someone who didn't expect to be greeted. I learned that Lily laughed louder in the garden than in her room, and that the sound of her laughter got caught between the tall hedges, as if the whole mansion held that noise carefully. I learned that Ryder had started opening his school books in the library, sitting on the floor as if the shelf protected him, his shoulders less curved with each passing day. I also learned to avoid Kieran without seeming to avoid him, a subtle art, made of swapped schedules and well-distributed silences. It worked until the afternoon he called me to the library. It was a Saturday. Light came through the tall windows in long columns, crossing the fine dust that hovered over the dark wooden shelves. He was standing near the window, without his jacket, sleeves rolled up to the elbow in a way I pretended not to register. He had a book in his hand that he wasn't reading. His fingers marked a page I doubted he'd opened that afternoon. "There's an event tonight," he said, "at the casino. I need you to come with me." I crossed my arms, leaning against the shelf. The smell of old paper rose at my back. "You need it, or I need it. I need rivals to see you with me. You need to decide whether you'll go." He closed the book with one hand, with the care of someone who'd already thought through that conversation before it happened. "It isn't a request with kindness. It's a request with clarity." I hated how he knew how to choose words. I hated even more the fact that I couldn't answer with sarcasm. "What time?" I asked. 9. "Thomas drives." He looked at me 1 second longer than necessary, and it was in that second that I understood his clarity wasn't coldness. It was control, and control, in Kieran Moretti, always carried something underneath. I left the library feeling like I'd lost some round he'd never played. Marlowe showed up an hour later with a bag, and the smile of someone who knew too much. Thomas brought her to the bedroom door, announced her with a minimal nod, and left. She crossed the room, tossed the bag on the bed, and pulled out a black dress in heavy fabric, with a V neckline and a discreet slit at the side. The fabric fell onto the pale quilt, with the low sound of silk against cotton. "Girl," she said, "I broke into Mrs. Halbrook's closet looking for something, and discovered that woman has pretty dangerous taste for someone who looks like a nun. This one's yours. Why is it here? Because the boss called me." She made air quotes around the word, boss. He said, and I quote, If Marlo is there, she feels less like she's been sold. Those were his words. I swear. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the dress. I looked at Marlo. I looked at the window, where the late afternoon was beginning to burn orange above the garden trees. He said that. He did, with that bottomless pit voice he has. I almost moved to another city. I didn't answer. I had no answer. I only had the inconvenient sense that someone had opened a gap in a wall I'd built myself. Marlo helped me dress, pinned my hair into a low bun, applied a dark lipstick, and said I looked like a widow who never cried for anyone. It was the most Marlo compliment she'd ever given me. I looked at myself in the bedroom mirror and barely recognized myself. The woman in the reflection had shoulders that didn't tremble. The car was in the garage at 9 on the dot. Thomas Devlin opened the back door with the impersonal precision of someone who'd made that gesture 1,000 times, and it was only when he got in the front, beside the driver, that he spoke. "Ma'am," he said, looking ahead, "I'll have you know the boss changed his tie 3 times today." I was silent for 2 seconds. The engine purred low beneath the seat. "More 3, I asked. 3. He adjusted the sleeve of his jacket. The navy blue lasted a minute and a half. A record. Marlo, from the seat beside me, laughed through her nose. I looked out the window because it was the only way not to laugh. The road lights passed blurred across the glass, yellow and fast, and I let my forehead rest against the cold glass for an instant longer than I should have. The Moretti's underground casino was in the basement of an old hotel downtown, one of those with a stone facade and a red carpet too worn to fake luxury. We went down a narrow marble staircase, crossed a metal door that opened onto the muffled sound of chips hitting green tables, and I stepped into a low-ceilinged hall, with golden lights that seemed suspended in the air. The smell was an expensive mix of cigar smoke, floral perfume, and waxed wood. A piano played in the background, slow, almost lazy. Kieran was standing near the entrance, talking to a man I didn't know. He turned the instant he saw me. His eyes went down the dress without hurry, returned to my face, and stayed. He didn't smile. He didn't comment. He just held out his hand, and I, without thinking too much, gave him mine. His fingers were warm, dry, firm. They closed over mine with a calm that seemed rehearsed and wasn't. "This is my wife," he said to the man beside him, in a voice so low I had to lean in to hear. "Talia." The word entered my chest through a door I'd forgotten to lock. He introduced me to 3 allies in a row. With each one, his hand came down to the small of my back and stayed there, firm, without the weight of possession, but with enough presence that no one would get the meaning wrong. I felt the heat of his palm pass through the heavy fabric of the dress, as if there were no fabric at all. I didn't move away. I wanted to move away, but I didn't move away. That was when Victor Kane appeared. I recognized him before I even knew the name. He was the man from the back of the warehouse, the one who had traded a nod with Kieran that first night. Up close, he had the look of a beloved uncle, well-kept gray hair, easy smile, a warm hand that squeezed my fingers longer than I wanted. His cologne was citrusy, too light for a man of that size. "So, this is the famous Talia," he said, with a paternal tone that flowed too easily. "Kieran, my boy, has hidden a jewel from us all. I'm glad to see you're well, dear. Your family too, I hear." "They are," I answered, returning the grip without looking away. "Good. Family is everything." He looked at Kieran when he said it, and the smile stayed a second too long on his face, a second that didn't close. Kieran answered with a nod, the same size as the nod from that first night. His hand came down to the small of my back, and stayed there with a different weight. I felt his fingers settle a little lower, as if he needed to remind me where I was. The night went on. Marlo circulated among the tables saying she was just observing the ecosystem. I pretended to understand roulette. I drank sparkling water from a tall crystal glass, and the ice clinked against the glass every time a round ended at the neighboring table. At a certain point, a rival captain, I learned later that his name was Brennan, from the old family up north, came too close to offer me a drink. He didn't actually touch me. He didn't need to. His breath was already in excess. Kieran rested his hand on my waist from the inside, his thumb against my rib, in a gesture that to anyone else was accidental, and to me was a warning. I felt his pressure pass through 3 layers, the fabric, the skin, and something beneath the skin that I didn't yet know how to name. He didn't look at the man. He spoke to me. "Are you thirsty? No? Then let's go." We left the hall without goodbyes. The rival captain stayed there with the drink in his hand. I didn't look back, but I felt his silence at my back like a slamming door. In the car back, Thomas stayed silent. Marlo slept with her mouth open in the seat beside me. the dark lipstick already smeared in one corner. Kieran sat in the front, beside the driver, and for the whole road said not a word. I looked out the window the entire time, watching the city lights thin out until they became just isolated poles on the empty road, and even so, I knew exactly where his shoulders were. The mansion was silent when we arrived. The gravel of the driveway crunched under the tires, and the heavy gate closed behind us with a distant click. Marlowe was taken to the guest room in the east wing, still drowsy. Kieran went straight up to the study. I pretended I was going to my room and veered off in the middle of the hallway. The study door was ajar. A thin band of golden light cut across the hallway rug. I didn't have the courage to peek up close, but the generous ceiling height of the hallway let the sound escape through the gap more than it should, and I recognized Victor's voice before I recognized the words. "The veils are still moving behind your back, Kieran." "You spared that family too much," Kieran's voice answered, low, controlled. "I spare what I decide to spare. And I respect you for that. I always have." A pause. The sound of ice in a glass. "I'm just saying your father wouldn't have, and that there are people remembering that." I stood in the hallway with my shoe in my hand, my heart beating in my temples, too loud for the silence around me. There was nothing else I could fish out, just a murmur that drifted off toward the desk. I went to my room before anyone could see me, closed the door, and leaned against the wood for a long minute, feeling the cold wood against my bare shoulders. I took off the dress slowly. The zipper slid down with a low sound that seemed too loud in the empty room. I put on a simple nightgown. I walked to the window because I needed air, and that was when I saw it. Victor went out alone through the garden a few minutes later. He crossed the lawn toward the service entrance, stopped near the fountain, and took his phone from the inner pocket of his jacket. He talked for 2 minutes. I couldn't hear a single word. The window was too high, the garden too big, the wind in the wrong direction, carrying any sound to the other side of the property. But I saw the way he turned his body so no one from the house would see him from the front. I saw the way he hung up and looked for an instant at the window of Kieran's study, on the second floor. I saw, and I closed the curtain before he could turn his face in my direction. I sat on the edge of the bed, with the curtain still brushing my back. It wasn't the rival captain who'd come too close that was robbing me of sleep. It was the beloved uncle smile that didn't close. I didn't yet know what Victor was planning. I knew he was planning something, and that I was the only person in that mansion who had seen, and the only person in that mansion no one would ever expect to be watching. I turned off the light. I lay down. I looked at the high ceiling, where the shadow of the garden branches swayed slowly against the plaster, and I thought I was going to have to decide, at some point that week, whether I trusted Kieran Moretti enough to open my mouth. Chapter 5. The Voice I Shouldn't Have Heard. 3 days after the casino, the tray trembled between my hands before I even left the kitchen. Marlowe had taught me the trick days earlier, laughing between 2 sips of black coffee. "Girl, in a rich person's house, nobody looks at who's carrying the tray." I didn't laugh at the time. Now, crossing the service hallway of the Moretti mansion with a cup of hot chocolate for Lily, I understood she was right. The staff passed me without seeing me, and I, without the surname slung across me, turned into wall. The sweet smell of the hot milk rose to my chin, and the steam fogged the rim of the white porcelain cup. The service hallway ran parallel to the side study, the one Kieran used for conversations that didn't fit in the main study. I knew this because I'd memorized the house's layout over the last few days, after that call Victor made in the garden. I wasn't proud of it, but sleeping had become a luxury for those who didn't know where the monsters walked. The wood floor there was different from the rest of the house, darker, more worn, with that subtle creak that gave away any hurried step. I walked slowly, feeling the sole of my shoe test each board before trusting it. That was when I heard his voice. The cabinet door between the hallway and the anteroom was open, not flung wide, just pulled to enough for the sound to leak through a gap the width of a finger. Victor Kane was speaking in an almost contained whisper, the kind a man only gives away when he thinks he's alone in the service wing. I stopped 3 steps away, held the tray against my belly so the cup wouldn't clink, and pressed my ear to the gap, holding my breath until my chest began to ache. "It doesn't have to be big," Victor was saying, low. "A car, a dark street, the boy coming home from the public school his sister put him in. Accident. Sad, but explainable." I couldn't swallow. Lily's chocolate began to slip from hot to lukewarm in my palm, and the porcelain, comfortable before, I took on a strange weight, as if it carried more than liquid. "And then our young boss is going to have to react," he went on, like someone commenting on the weather. "He'll blame the veils, because we'll hand him the trail, And the capos will finally understand that the young Moretti has enough blood in him to lead a war. The other voice, on the other end of the line, I didn't hear clearly. It was a vibration of low timbre, a metallic murmur crossing the phone speaker. It didn't matter. I had what I needed, and I had what I never wanted. My brother's name inside the sentence of a man who smiled at me over breakfast, who asked for another piece of bread, and asked whether Lily had liked the new school. I backed away without turning my back, fear teaching me to walk like a woman who already knew what was at stake. Each step backward was a calculation. Weight on the heel first, then the rest. When the hallway turned at the service stairs, I ran. I climbed the 2 flights to the 2nd floor, holding the tray against my chest, the chocolate splashing on my hand and running down my wrist in warm threads. I went into Lily's room, set the cup on the corner table, kissed her forehead because she was asleep, and I needed to remember why I was still standing. Her mouth smelled of milk. A curl of her hair had stuck to the corner of her mouth, and I moved it away with the tip of my finger. That was it. That was why I left. I crossed the upstairs hallway without seeing the portraits, without noticing the smell of wax from the freshly polished furniture, went down the main staircase with my hand sliding along the dark wood railing, and knocked on Kieran's study with a closed fist, without ceremony. "Come in." His voice came firm from the other side. I turned the handle, closed the door behind me, and stood there, leaning against the wood, unable to speak at first. He was standing behind the desk, sleeves rolled up to the elbow, a folder open in front of him. The yellow light of the desk lamp traced shadows on his forearms. He lifted his eyes. His expression changed in half a second. "Talia." "Victor arranged an accident for Ryder," I said, and my voice came out choked, the way I swore to myself it wouldn't come out. "Just now, on the phone. He wants to push the blame onto the Vales and force you into a war." Kieran didn't ask me to repeat it. He didn't ask for proof. He walked around the desk in 3 steps, stopped in front of me, held my look for a whole second. It was a short second. It was the longest second I'd ever lived in that mansion. I caught the smell of the study's cedar mixed with his dry cologne, something woodsy I'd already begun to recognize without meaning to. "Where's Ryder now?" "In the library, with Lily, doing homework. They stay here. No one comes in. No one goes out without me or Thomas." He pressed a button on the desk phone. He said 3 sentences in Italian that I understood half of. He dialed another number, gave 2 instructions in English. One captain at the gate, another in the basement. I caught the names in the middle of the orders. Roan, Ezra. His voice didn't rise a note. It was the calm of a man who had decided before he knew he'd need to decide, and that, more than anything else, made me feel the ground shift. When he hung up, he came back near me. His hand rose, stopped in the air, hesitated, and landed on my face, just the tips of his fingers, along the line of my jaw. His skin was warmer than I expected. "You heard what no one was supposed to hear," he said, low. "From here on, it's my calculation, not yours." I wanted to answer something. Nothing came. He took his hand away before I could decide whether I wanted him to take it away, and the place where his fingers had been kept burning, as if he'd left a mark. Thomas appeared in the doorway without knocking. He was already in his jacket, his hair wet at the ends as if he'd run out of the shower. He looked at me, looked at Kieran, didn't ask. "Let's go." "Talia," Kieran said, and I swear I heard a plea where before there had only been an order. "Stay here, please." I stayed, for exactly 30 seconds. I counted on the wall clock, watched the big hand drag half a turn, and then I grabbed the coat off the back of the armchair and went down after them, because there were things I couldn't hear from far away. The mansion's garage was a clean cement hangar with 3 black cars lined up, the smell of motor oil cut by the disinfectant Marlowe complained about every day. Kieran opened the door of the second one without saying anything when he saw me. There was no argument in his look, just a brief weariness, as if he already knew I'd come down. Thomas got into the driver's seat, Roan into the passenger seat with a gun on his lap, that he covered with his jacket the instant he sat down. Kieran got in with me in the back, closed the door, and the car pulled out before I found the seatbelt. "You were supposed to stay," he said, without turning to me. I answered, facing the window, watching the mansion's gate disappear behind us. "I didn't." He didn't insist. He took my hand on the middle seat, opened my fingers and closed his between mine, without looking. It was a quick gesture, silent, almost absent-minded, as if he himself hadn't realized what he'd done. It was the first time he touched me without an audience. The warehouse we went to wasn't the one at Pier 17. It was farther east, closer to the train line, a smaller hangar with a zinc roof and 3 old pickup trucks parked in front, the facade of an abandoned garage. The streetlight was yellow, weak, the kind that flickered when a truck passed. Thomas parked 2 blocks away. Roan got out first, walked along the sidewalk like someone who lived there, vanished around the corner. He came back in 3 minutes with a minimal nod of the head. Clear. 4 men inside, Victor and the boy. When I heard boy, I gripped the coat against my chest. Kieran noticed. He turned to me, his voice low. You stay in the car. It's not negotiable. Kieran, you brought me here. Now let me do this. I stayed. They were the 11 longest minutes of my life. I counted. I looked at the clock on the car's dash and counted every minute, every breath, every time the glass fogged with my breath and cleared again. 2 shots at the end of the 5th minute, warning shots, into the ceiling. I learned later. The sound came muffled, dull, as if the night swallowed it before it reached the street. Voices muffled by the zinc door. And then, the silence that comes before a door opens. The door opened. Ryder came out first, propped against a man I didn't know. He was walking. He was whole. I got out of the car without thinking, crossed the sidewalk, and he fell into my arms before I reached him. He smelled of dust and fear, that sour smell of cold sweat that sticks to clothes. He whispered into my shoulder, his voice breaking in the middle. I didn't know, Talia. I swear I didn't know. I know. I gripped the back of his neck with my palm, the way I did when he was a child and had a nightmare. His hair was wet with sweat at the roots. Kieran appeared in the hangar doorway behind him, with Thomas at his side. He didn't come out dirty. He didn't come out in a hurry. He came out with Victor by the arm, without apparent violence, leading him like someone taking a business partner to a meeting he hadn't asked for. The capos arrived 2 minutes later, in 3 cars. Roan had called over the radio. I didn't understand everything that happened there. In the street, in front of that fake garage, I understood enough. I saw Victor look at Kieran like someone who still thought he could talk, lips parted in the middle of a sentence no one asked for. You used a 17-year-old boy, Victor, Kieran said, voice low, without looking at him. And that's what the capos are going to remember. Victor didn't answer. I saw the capos listen to the recording Tomas was carrying. The side study had had a discreet microphone since Old Man Moretti's day, and Victor had spoken there, thinking he spoke alone. And I saw Victor lower his head for the first time, his chin dropping slowly, as if even his neck had surrendered before his mouth. No innocent blood, no blood of ours. That was the only thing that mattered. When we went back to the car, Ryder between us in the back seat, no one spoke on the way. The engine hummed low. The highway lights passed across the ceiling in yellow stripes and disappeared. Ryder rested his head on my shoulder at some point and fell asleep, or pretended to, with the uneven breathing of someone who still didn't trust the silence. Kieran looked at me once, from the other side of my brother. I held the look. It was the first time the 2 of us looked at each other like 2 people who had survived something together, and not like a contract. He held out his hand again, over Ryder's lap. I placed mine on top. His fingers closed over mine with a slowness that didn't match the night we'd had, as if he wanted to keep the gesture before it ended, and neither of us said anything until the mansion's fountain appeared through the window. Chapter 6, The Door He Let Me Open. I woke up late that Wednesday. I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept until the sunlight came in, whole through the window, spilling onto the rug in a warm band that smelled of garden flowers. For an instant, I lay there, listening to the silence of the mansion, the way you listen to a foreign language you're beginning to understand. I went down in slippers. The hallway was clean, waxed, with that discreet scent of polished wood that Mrs. Halbrook, a housekeeper with firm hands and watchful eyes, spread every morning as if she were praying. The house smelled of warm bread and coffee, a rare thing, because Mrs. Halbrook only made bread when someone in the family had been through something. I think she wrote it down in her notebook as something. The smell arrived in layers. First the crumb of the bread, then the melting butter, last the coffee she strained through the cloth sieve. The old way. Lily was drawing on the garden floor with chalk, her tongue out in concentration, her skirt stained white and blue, her knees dirty with soil. Ryder was reading an old book leaning against the fountain, with that hunched posture of a boy who doesn't yet know the size of his own body, and when he saw me, he broke into a smile I hadn't seen in months. Morning. You pain, he said. I cried without warning. It wasn't loud crying. It was the kind that runs down before we decide. Thomas, Kieran's right-hand man, who was crossing the hallway carrying Mrs. Halbrook's breakfast back to the kitchen, stopped when he saw me, looked at my face, looked at the untouched cup on the tray, and held the cup out like someone offering a coat on a cold night. "Figured you'd need it before lunch," he remarked, his voice flat, without looking too closely to spare me. "Oh, the boss is in the study. He asked for you to come down when you were ready." "Thank you, Thomas. At your service," he answered. And then, quietly, without moving his face, "Good to see you on your feet, Renlo." I held back a laugh into the cup. The porcelain burned the tips of my fingers slightly, and I was grateful for that small burn, because it reminded me I was there. Marlowe, my friend since the diner days, appeared in the garden in the late morning. Thomas had had her name cleared at the gate after the wedding, and she used the pass like a country club membership card, bringing a cheese roll wrapped in a checkered dish towel and a face that said she knew half of what had happened and wanted to know the other half. She sat with me on the stone bench beside the fountain, looked at Lily, looked at Ryder, looked at me, and lingered in my eyes like someone checking whether the whole piece was still in place. "Girl, does the mob pay hazard pay now?" "No." Shame. I was going to apply. It was the first time I'd laughed without guilt in weeks. She squeezed my hand under the dish towel, left the cheese roll in my lap, and said nothing more. Marlowe knew, better than anyone, that her silence was worth 3 times other people's questions. Kieran called me to the study after lunch. I'd changed, pinned up my hair, stood in front of the bedroom mirror longer than necessary, smoothing the hem of the dress the way you'd smooth courage. When I went in, he was standing, leaning against the desk, without a jacket, sleeves rolled up to the elbow. There was a closed folder on top of the desk, aligned in the corner, like everything he touched. The afternoon light came in diagonally through the blinds, drawing pale stripes on the wide plank floor. "Sit," he said. "I'd rather stand." He held the look for a second, and it was the second of him yielding. He didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth gave a sign that maybe no one else would notice. I'd already learned to read that corner better than I'd like to admit. "The contract," he began, and pushed the folder 2 fingers closer to me, with the tip of his index finger, as if even the gesture needed measure. "It can end today. You've already paid more than you owed. There's a house ready, in the north of the city, under the name of a company no one will be able to trace back to me. There's enough money for Lily to study wherever she wants. There's protection for Ryder for as long as he needs it. No clauses, no mandatory return, no call from me." He said all of it without rehearsing. I knew he'd rehearsed. "And you?" I asked. "I kept what I promised you. I didn't keep what I promised myself, but that's my problem." "Which is?" I insisted, lower, taking a short step toward him. "What did you promise yourself?" He took a while to answer. He crossed the study rug with his usual controlled stride, stopped a step from me, kept his hands in his trouser pockets, and it was the first time I saw Kieran Moretti search for a word like someone searching for a key inside a coat he hasn't worn in a long time. "Not to trap you." I looked away, not because I wanted to escape him, but because I needed the window to breathe. The garden was still there, intact, indifferent. Lily was drawing. Ryder was reading. The fountain made its fountain noise, that constant murmur that has no name because we never stop to listen. The sun was setting at an angle on the hydrangeas, and I thought, for a foolish moment, that the house was too beautiful to be a prison and too dangerous to be a home. "Can I think about it?" "You can think for as long as you need. I'll be in the study." I left. I walked the hallway with no destination, crossed the back door, sat on the edge of the fountain. The stone was still cold from the morning dew, and the cold rose up my skirt to my skin, bringing me back into my body. Lily came to me with chalk on her cheek and her hands, asked if I was crying, and I said no, I was thinking, and she corrected me that thinking with a wet face was crying. I kissed her forehead, smelled the smell of a child's sweat and sunscreen, and told her to go back to drawing. I thought about everything. I thought about my parents on the highway, on that curve I'd never seen and yet could draw with my eyes closed. I thought about the bag Ryder never should have picked up. I thought about the pen Kieran held a second too long, the night I signed the contract. I thought about Lily's bread cut without being asked by Mrs. Holbrook. I thought about his hand in the car, on top of mine, on the way back from the warehouse, the warm, calm, definitive weight. I thought about his hand on my face in the study, before he went after Victor. His hesitation had been more beautiful than any promise. Leaving there would be easier. I had no doubt about that. I knew how to build a life from scratch because I'd already done it 3 times, with less than what he was offering me. But I'd spent my whole life choosing what was easier for my siblings, and for the first time someone was offering me the chance to choose what was harder for myself. I went back inside. The hallway seemed longer than in the morning, and each step sounded on the boards like a confirmation. Kieran was standing on the hall staircase, one hand on the dark wood railing, waiting without pressing. I stopped 2 steps below, at the height of his chest, and caught his smell. Woodsy soap, a trace of coffee, nothing too perfumed. I'm staying. He closed his eyes for a second. Just one. By contract? No. By debt? No. Why then? Because I want to find out the rest. His hand left the railing and came to my face, this time without hesitating. His fingers spread at the back of my neck with calm firmness. His thumb passed along the line of my cheek, slowly, like someone checking whether the person was real. I climbed 1 more step. He leaned in. A kiss. Just one, restrained, more grave than eager, with the faint taste of black coffee and held breath, like someone signing something they'll have to honor afterward. I climbed the stairs with him. The door of the main bedroom, the one I'd never gone into, closed behind us with the dry click of heavy wood, and that was all the hallway heard. I woke to the balcony light hitting the sheet. It was a golden, late-morning light, the kind that takes its time to climb the pale walls and seems older than the day. Kieran was already up, leaning against the railing outside, coffee in hand, shirtless because the morning was warm, in the previous day's trousers. The little balcony table had 2 coffees, side by side, one waiting for the other. I sat up in bed, pulled the sheet to my shoulders, and he turned the instant he heard the fabric. He came back into the room, barefoot on the wood floor, the rug muffling half his step, and sat on the edge of the bed, facing me. "Good morning." "Good morning." He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face, tucking it behind my ear with the care of someone handling something breakable. It was a gesture so small I could have missed it if I hadn't been looking. But I was looking. "You slept," he noted. "Didn't you?" I slept. "I think for the first time since you walked into that warehouse." I laughed softly, my throat still hoarse with sleep. I kissed his shoulder lightly, without any promise, just because I could. He closed his eyes for an instant, the same way he had on the stairs. I was beginning to understand that that instant was his way of yielding. I drank my coffee in bed. The cup warmed my hands, and the steam rose in a spiral up to the ceiling. He went back to the balcony, leaned against the railing again, and stood looking at the garden like someone who still didn't believe in the silence. I could hear Lily down in the garden, shouting something to Ryder, and Ryder answering in the tone of an older brother in reverse. Mrs. Holbrook complaining about the chalk on the bench, the fountain, everything in the same place. And I, up there, with the sheet and the coffee and the man on the balcony, realized that nothing was in the same place anymore. Before I closed my eyes, I lay my head back on the pillow. The sheet smelled of him and of me at the same time, mixed, and that mixture made me smile to myself. And it was in that half-second between awake and dozing that I remembered. The page. That day I signed the contract. I'd turned 1 page too fast. A clause at the end, the kind a lawyer puts in out of habit. I'd think about it later, and the thought dissolved before I could decide whether it deserved attention. Lena here, that wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. I married Kieran Moretti to save my brother. A contract. A signature. No heart involved. But somewhere between the 9 o'clock coffee and the silence only he knew how to make, I forgot it was a deal. I thought I'd found a home. I loved him. I slept with him. I believed in him. Then the nausea came. The coffee I could no longer swallow. The positive test hidden in the drawer. And on that same day, the envelope. 3 things struck me like stab wounds. The clause I'd never seen, printed in tiny letters on the last page. The bearer of the Moretti heir may not leave or dissolve the union while the child lives. The recording of his voice, confirming that he needed an heir to consolidate his power. And his signature, dry, at the end of the line that bound me forever. I ran out of that house with his baby growing inside me. But now, in the dark of the car carrying me far away, a doubt tears me apart inside. If Kieran signs everything without reading, trusting blindly in the consigliere, who put that line there? Who recorded those words? Who wanted me to run exactly now, with the Moretti heir in my womb? What if the man I betrayed was never the monster I thought he was? What if the greatest betrayal didn't come from him, but from someone he loves like a father? What if, by running, I've just handed our child into the hands of the real enemy? Like I said, that was just a taste of Book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and Book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to receive the next ones, search for My Stories by Lena on YouTube to get the best dark romance content. Remember, the official channel is My Stories by Lena on YouTube. I'll be waiting for you there. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a Book 2, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.